I thought I'd come to my own kitchen to show you how to make hot cross buns. This year was the first year in 21 years I was not able to be at the Trinity kitchen on Palm Sunday making everybody the hot cross buns. So I thought maybe you guys would like a little hot cross bun tutorial, and we can get started in a minute. This is a recipe I found on the Food Network that I'm sort of making some adjustments to. You know, at Trinity I usually make about 400 hot cross buns, and this recipe makes about 12. But the first thing we're going to do, oh, and by the way, I'm going to put the ingredient list underneath this video when we post it, so you guys will be able to see what the quantities are. The first thing we're going to do is, this is a half a cup of water and a half a cup of milk that have been heated. I just heated them in the microwave for about 30 seconds. It's just finger warm temperature. If it's much hotter than that, it will kill your yeast. To that, you're gonna add 4.5 teaspoons of yeast. So I have some yeast here. We're gonna just whisk that up, and we're just gonna put this aside and let it get foamy on its own while we put together the rest of these ingredients. All right, we can just put it here in the front. All right, in this bowl we have 3 cups of all-purpose flour. You could use bread flour if that's all you've got. That's got a little more gluten in it, but it would work fine. They'd be maybe a little chewier, but this is just your basic all-purpose flour. There's 3 cups of that in here. To that we're gonna add the rest of our dry ingredients. So we're gonna add a half a cup of sugar, if I'm correct. Is that correct? Half a cup of sugar. We're going to add a teaspoon of salt, my little salt pot here. We're going to add just a dash of cinnamon. It says like a half a teaspoon. I don't like too much cinnamon in my hot cross buns. I don't like that to be the dominant flavor, because the flavor that I really like is this the star anise. It's the thing, not the star anise, it's just anise seed. Star anise is actually the Asian spice that's shaped like a star. So this is just anise seed. It can be overwhelming if you use too much. I'm going to put about a teaspoon in, and a teaspoon goes a long way because it sort of seeps into the dough and flavors the whole dough while it's rising. The other thing that I always add, besides the star anise, to my hot cross buns is some zest. I'm just stirring together the dry ingredients, kind of incorporating everything together. I like to add, I'm just guessing here because I'm doing a smaller batch, but I'm going to say the zest of about half an orange. And this is a microplane zester. You could probably use some sort of, like if you have like a Parmesan cheese grater or something, but you don't want anything much with a shred much bigger than that. So I'm just going to go. Just run our finger off to get this zest in the bowl. I'm going to stir that. You have to make sure that that sometimes sticks in clumps. You want to make sure you've got that nice and spread out. Okay, now that we have all of our dry ingredients mixed up together, well incorporated, we're going to make a well in the middle. We're going to sort of push things to the side a little bit, and we're going to get our wet ingredients together. And the wet ingredients for this is 1/3 cup of melted butter, and then you need an egg yolk. So we're going to separate this egg. We're going to crack the egg here. We're going to roll it back and forth between the shells to get the white off. This just makes it a little bit richer. Just the yolk. This butter is not that hot anymore, so I'm just gonna whisk the egg yolk into the butter. If the butter was still really hot, it would cook the egg, which would be bad. So we want to make sure that your butter is just kind of still melted, but room temperature. Then we're gonna add 1.5 teaspoons of vanilla. So we mix those things together. You can get this out of the way. In the well, we're going to pour first our yeast mixture into the well, and then our butter, yolk, and vanilla in. And the reason you do a well is that you can sort of slowly incorporate the flour into things. You don't get like those big lumps right away. So you can sort of start to bring the sides in, and you're stirring this. All right, guys, so I've mostly incorporated the things in here. What we got is some crumbs on the bottom, and what you're looking for, they call this a shaggy dough. So it's just come together, and I'm about to gather it up with my hand and start kneading it, but I thought I'd give you a little crash course on this sort of dough, which is called a soft roll dough. And the reason it's soft is because we put that egg yolk and that butter in it. Those are fats, right? And the thing about gluten is that gluten is a protein that's in flour. And when the way sometimes you want the gluten to develop, you want like a nice chewy French loaf or something, and that is the ingredients for a loaf like that are just flour and yeast and water and maybe some salt. But as soon as you put some fat in there with the flour, the gluten strands, when you're kneading it, they can't develop as long. The fat makes the gluten strands shorter, and that makes a much more tender loaf. That's why they call shortening. It makes gluten fibers short, so you're making like a short cake or a pie dough. You don't want chewy, you want tender, like in a biscuit or a scone, for instance. The difference between this and a scone is that we're gonna actually knead it, because we want some of the gluten, we want it to be a bread. We don't want it to be like a biscuit or a scone. So anyway, the fat that's in here is gonna inhibit the gluten strands from getting too long and too tough and chewy, but the kneading of it will help develop the gluten just enough to make it like a roll as opposed to like a short pastry. The dough has pretty much come together. There's a few shaggy bits in the bottom. It still requires one more addition. Before we turn it out onto the board to knead it properly, we're going to add the final ingredient, which traditionally would be some currants. But in the current situation, I was not able to locate currants. So what I've got is some nice dried blueberries. So before we roll it out, I'm going to put these in here in the bowl and just sort of incorporate them in the bowl before. Because what happens sometimes is they start to put a little flour on the board. And since we all have so much time on our hands, this 8 minutes of kneading will seem like you've done something worthwhile with your day, right? So what we're doing is we're just stretching those gluten strands. When you knead, you press away, and if you just press down, you're not getting the desired effect. You fold it and then you push it, and it stretches the dough. And that's what you're trying to do to develop the gluten strands. And you're just going to keep doing this and keep doing this. You can tell that it's really nice and elastic. It's got some firmness to it, and one of the other things about working with dough that has fat in it, it just has a really nice texture. Anyway, so what we need to do now is we need to put this aside to rise. You can use a clean bowl. I just used the bowl that I had worked it in earlier. I put a little vegetable oil on the bottom, put it in upside down, kind of spin it around in the oil so it doesn't stick. Make sure it's all coated with oil so it doesn't stick to the bowl once it's risen. We're going to cover it with a towel, and we're going to put it in a warm area in the kitchen for about an hour and a half. You can put it on top of your refrigerator. You can put it on the back of your stove if it's warm there. But you want it to more or less double in size. The warmer it is, the faster that will happen. I realized that there's one other thing we could do while we're letting the dough rise, something that needs to be done before we finish the whole job, and that is to make the icing that goes on top of the buns, the crosses that go on the hot cross buns. And the orange that we used earlier for the zest, we're now going to use the inside of that orange. She's going to cut that in half for me. In here I have about 2 cups of powdered sugar. This is probably more icing than we'll need for these 12 buns, but I have a difficult time not making in quantity. So Violet's going to go ahead and squeeze this juice. I'm also going to put a splash of vanilla in here. You have to be careful when you're making this icing. We're just doing this by eye. I'm not measuring, but it doesn't take long. It seems dry, and then all of a sudden, it's too loose. So you just add the liquid a little bit, little by little. We're gonna add just a tiny bit of water. And just some more of this orange juice. The thing about this is that if you're looking for particular consistency, and if you do add too much water, you can always go back and add more powdered sugar. You can just keep going back and forth until you get it right. So this is almost right. It's just a little bit thick. You want it to hold a line, but that's a little thick. So I'm gonna add a little bit more water. Things like that. So this is feeling really nice. That's a good, that'll hold a nice line on the buns. Okay, so what we're gonna do now is we're gonna put this, I'm gonna transfer this. My counter's kind of sticky with orange juice. We're gonna transfer this into this Ziploc bag. Get all the air out, and we're just gonna put it aside till the buns are ready to be iced. All right, we've let this dough rise now for an hour and a half. It's nearly doubled in size, which is pretty good. So what we're gonna do now is we're gonna portion them out. We've got some spray here. We've got a 9x13 pan. We're gonna spray it with some pan spray. If you don't have parchment, or you don't have, you could probably use just a cookie sheet if you needed to. Maybe just put them all tight on one side. You kind of want them to raise and touch each other. But you could also wipe the pan with butter or oil, but you just want them to not stick, and they would stick if they don't have something protecting them. Parchment is best, but you can use whatever you've got for that. What we're gonna do now is we need to shape these into rolls. Oh, this dough is so nice, feels so good. So we need to make 12 rolls. So what we're gonna do is, I've got my big guns out. I'm gonna cut it into quarters, and then we're gonna cut each quarter into 3. Sometimes that's easier if you kind of shape it into a little loaf like this. They don't have to be perfect, but I've been doing this a long time, so generally I'm pretty accurate. All right, so now what we have to do is to make the rolls round, nice and round, is you have to, I think there's a technical word for this in baking, I'm not sure, I feel like it's called riddling them or something. It might just be called rolling them. But anyway, what you want to do is, it's good if there's a little bit of oil in the dough. It makes the wood a little bit sticky. And you roll, and you can feel the tension. And as you roll it, it starts to come up under your hand. You get to pull that the skin of the dough nice and tight around, and you get a nice circle. It's easier than if you have too much flour on the board, it'll just slide all around, and you don't get the grip you need on the bottom to form it into a nice ball. So what we're going to do is we're going to put these 3x4 in the pan. Finish rolling up the rest of these. And then they need to rise again. They need to rise another 45 minutes to an hour. You can tell they're proofed properly when you touch them, and it doesn't bounce immediately back. Like that's not proofed well enough for baking. You want it to hold that poke just longer. Before we put them in the oven, we'll do that again, and I can show you what I'm talking about. Hey guys, all right, we've let these proof for about 45 minutes to an hour. You can see how much bigger they were than they were before we let them rest. You can tell they're ready to go because when you press them, the indentation doesn't spring back automatically. It still leaves like a little bit of an indentation. That's how you know when they're ready to go in the oven. I have in here 1 egg, whisked with a little bit of water, basically making an egg wash. And before we put these in the oven, we're gonna brush them with egg wash, make them kind of shiny and get evenly brown. I have the oven preheated to 350, and we're gonna put in the oven for about 20-25 minutes. The internal temperature of the bread is supposed to be like 190 when it's cooked, if you wanna poke one in the bottom to see. But generally I like to rely on what they look like and how they kind of feel when I tap on them. And we're putting them in that 350 degree oven. And pull them out when they're done. All right, you can see the buns are now cool, and look how beautiful and shiny they are from that egg wash. It makes all the difference. So what we're gonna do now is we're gonna put the crosses on them. So I have to confess that when I first started making the hot cross buns at Trinity, that I would make a cross on every single bun. And it took me probably 5 years. This is what experience teaches you. It took me probably 5 years to realize that I didn't have to make a cross on each bun, that I could just do it like this. But it took me a really long time to figure that out, unfortunately for me. So anyway, here's what they look like. We're gonna let the icing set a little bit, and then we're gonna eat some. Okay everyone, we've got our buns finished and we've got them here looking lovely on the display. It was really fun doing this today in my home kitchen with my kids, but it's not like being with all of you at Trinity. I really miss all of you and my Trinity family. So here we are, we've got our buns. Violet is gonna try a bun.
We're both gonna try one.
I'm gonna try a bun also. Let's see what they look like on the inside.
Get that out.
Oh, that's pretty good.
Mmm. Mm.
That's not a bad bun.
Delicious.
That's a delicious bun. All right, you guys, it's been really fun. Happy Easter. I hope to see you really, really soon.